Thanks to a trade made on Thursday, the Philadelphia Eagles now have A.J. Brown, DeVonta Smith, and Jahan Dotson in their wide receiver room. But the Washington Commanders somehow come away as the winners of that trade. We'll tell you that and more coming up on this episode of Locked On NFL.
You are Locked On NFL, your daily NFL podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome, everybody, to this Friday episode of Locked On NFL, your daily podcast covering the National Football League, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much for making Locked On NFL your first listen of the day every day. And don't forget that you can subscribe for free on YouTube or wherever you are listening to this podcast. I'm David Harrison. He's Lauren Cox. We are both members of this prestigious podcast network here with you on Locked On NFL this Friday. Lauren is also covering the Chicago Bears for Locked On Bears, and I'm covering the Washington Commanders for Locked On Commanders. Of course, Locked On NFL is here for you every Monday through Friday, along with our everydayers. And everydayers, you already know because we tell you every day, but we appreciate you continuing to come through for this program. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial on NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started today. On Thursday morning, Lauren, as I was on my way to Washington Commanders practice for day 16 of training camp, which doesn't sound like a lot, but is a lot of days of training camp, my phone started blowing up. And I'll tell you, just like I told Commanders fans, I'm driving and I get a phone text notification. I say, yeah, I'm driving. I'll get that later. Get another one. I say, yeah, I'm driving. I'll get that later. I get a third one. I was like, all right, something's going on. So I hit my Apple CarPlay. I let Siri tell me that Jahan Dotson has been traded to the Philadelphia Eagles. So I immediately found the safest place I could to pull over, digest the details of the trade, shoot my 1-minute YouTube short and now video for the Locked On Podcast Network. And now here we are on Locked On NFL talking about this as we get ready to enter the weekend. The parameters of the deal: the Washington Commanders are sending third-year wide receiver Jahan Dotson, first-round draft pick 3 years ago, to the Philadelphia Eagles. They're also sending a 2025 fifth-round draft pick. And in return, the Philadelphia Eagles are sending a third-round draft pick next year and 2 seventh-round draft picks next year. Now, the specific third-round pick, so they have their own third-round pick and the Miami Dolphins third-round pick. Don't know yet which third-round pick that is. My assumption is it's their own because they're the latest of the two. So I'm just going to assume that that's what they did. So, Lauren, the interesting part of this is there's a lot of mad Commanders fans about this trade. But when we come into this from an overall national type of view, the question that most people want to answer is who won the trade? Was it the Eagles that won the trade or the Commanders that won the trade? So tell any angry Commanders fans that might be watching this or any other fans out there that are watching this why the Washington Commanders are actually the winners of this deal.
Yeah, I think when the news first drops, you're like, okay, wait a minute. They just took Jahan Dotson in the first round 2 years ago. And not that he was blowing up the NFL or anything, but you're 2 years into a first round pick's career and you're giving up on him for, okay, a third round pick, really a pick swap, move up from the fifth round to the third round, but still like a third round pick is not anywhere close to the first round pick you just used on this player. And you look at the Commanders depth chart and you might think, well, okay, after Terry McLaurin, they don't have a ton of proven talent there. So why the heck are they getting rid of Jahan Dotson for a mid-round draft pick? And I think you know better than any of us where Dotson has been really on this depth chart at training camp and in the preseason. The Commanders, obviously, they drafted Luke McCaffrey in the third round this year. They've got Olamide Zaccheaus from the Eagles and the Falcons before that, who's been kind of one of the standouts for them. And Dyami Brown is also in that group. Like Dotson had been slowly falling further and further down in that rotation, despite being a recent first round pick. And all of a sudden, it feels to me like the Commanders got a third round pick for someone who might be their number 3 or number 4 receiver, a guy who's had 500 yards each of the last 2 seasons. Like that seems like pretty good value if you weren't expecting that guy to be a major player in your rotation anyway.
Yeah, I think that at the end of the day, the biggest thing that the Washington Commanders fan base has to kind of accept or understand, at least when it comes to this deal, is that Adam Peters, the current general manager, didn't draft Jahan Dotson. And Dan Quinn, the current head coach of the Washington Commanders, didn't sign off on drafting Jahan Dotson. The person that drafted Jahan Dotson was the head coach / de facto GM at the time, Ron Rivera. So that's a Ron Rivera pick. And we already know this new regime has been getting rid of pretty much every Ron Rivera pick that they inherited that they couldn't just let go in free agency or release beforehand. So at the end of the day, like what you're talking about is very accurate. Now, I don't know if he would have slid down to like the fourth position on the depth chart, but that's basically what you're looking at is a guy who comes in penciled in as the number 2 receiver. It's supposed to be Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson. Now let's go figure out who that third guy is supposed to be. And slowly but surely it became, well, Olamide Zaccheaus is beating him in training camp and balling out comparatively. Dyami Brown is making plays in preseason games and also every once in a while in training camp. Luke McCaffrey is not necessarily a shooting star this preseason, but he's also still a very new receiver, right? He hasn't played wide receiver for all that long, yet he's still looking technically sound in a lot of things that he's doing. And Jahan Dotson, it's not so much that Jahan Dotson was doing anything wrong per se. It's more so he wasn't finding his place in this offense. He had honestly one really good day of training camp. And that day came about 2.5 weeks ago. He had like 6 or 7 catches, made a couple of sideline grabs. Really great day. And the timing of it was perfect because it was also the day he did his podium with us. So we got to talk to him right after he had this really great day of practice. Unfortunately, after that, he pretty much faded into nothing again. And then Cliff Kingsbury comes out and talks about how he's got to get comfortable with the system and they're trying to get comfortable with how they're going to use him. Dan Quinn says in Miami that the number 2 job is wide open and certainly up for conversation. And we slowly saw Jahan not getting any perimeter reps anymore with the first team, only getting slot reps with the first team. Then again, when he's in the slot, not being super effective. So it kind of gets into this category where you're talking about, like, we're not going to use this guy. Let's get something for him.
I think the challenging part, if I'm a Washington Commanders fan, is that like, okay, so Dotson wasn't doing great. I can get that, but okay, you got Terry McLaurin, and then your next couple leading receivers from last year are gone. Curtis Samuel's gone.
Yeah.
Dotson was third. He's gone too. So you might like that. Zaccheaus and Dyami Brown have shown you some flashes and stuff, but like they don't necessarily have the kind of production that leaves you super super confident over the course of their career that, oh, this is going to be a good enough receiving core without why am I spacing on the name of the guy they just traded?
Jahan Dotson. Yeah.
Jahan Dotson. Thank you. I'm thinking of Jalen Reagor in my head. So it's like not that Reagor was some special weapon that they couldn't afford to give up, but like now without him, you really need guys to play better in Washington than we've seen up to this point in their careers and step into bigger roles and to give Terry McLaurin another receiver unless they've got something else somewhere up their sleeve.
Yeah. And that's where, we're going to have a conversation about that here in just a minute. But another reason the Commanders fans are kind of down on this trade, and again, having to remember, like, this is someone else selling somebody else's property, essentially, in the term of, bringing in players and general managers having to manage these rosters, is when you look at the math and you look at the draft value charts like we always do, and using the Jimmy Johnson model, which there's multiple models out there, but using the Jimmy Johnson model, essentially what it boils down to is the Philadelphia Eagles essentially gave Jahan Dotson 3rd round value. So if you boil Jahan Dotson down to that 3rd round value, we're talking late 3rd round value, like somewhere between pick 91 to 99, depending on which third they're getting from Philadelphia. Then you basically took a 1st round draft pick before his 3rd year actually officially started, because this is his 3rd year in the NFL. And before that 3rd year officially starts, you flipped him for 3rd round value and you added a 5th round pick, which basically means the Washington Commanders actually gave up more value because that 3rd round pick that you would equal for Washington is actually a better pick than Philadelphia's given up. And then the 5th round pick that Washington is giving, you're getting 2 7ths in exchange. So the Commanders essentially just paid the Philadelphia Eagles to take a player who is now going to play for them and quite possibly twice this year is going to help them beat the team that just sold them to the pick. So, or to the sold the player to the team. So the question then comes in, Lauren, inside the division. My stance on this with Commanders fans is if Adam Peters is trading Jahan Dotson inside the NFC East, it's because he didn't have a choice.
Yeah. I mean, why else would you in this? I mean, it had to have been the highest bidder there. And you're going to take less to get even less for a former 1st round pick to send him somewhere else. And plus you feel like, okay, like in Philadelphia, he's at best their number 3 receiver. And you were feeling like in Washington, he was barely going to be at best your number 3 receiver. So they certainly know better than Philadelphia what Dotson has been able to do more recently this preseason. And I can give a GM some confidence to pull a deal like that, especially if it wasn't his 1st round pick. So he doesn't have to do that part of the math equation and say, a receiver who gets 500 yards a season, I can get a 3rd round pick for a 500-yard receiver. Like, I'll take it. Somebody else spent that money on him earlier. I'm just getting to cash in whatever I can get out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And at the end of the day, again, we can talk about like valuations and everything. I pretty much stood on the mantle. I'm going to say right there that if Adam Peters had gotten like value offered from any other team outside the NFC East, he would have absolutely taken that deal. So the fact that he's taking this deal from Philly means that Philly paid the tax to get him to trade inside the division, and that essentially tells you what the rest of the NFL thinks of Jahan Dotson entering this move. So I think the biggest winner here is Jahan Dotson. He gets to go back home. He gets to go to a different team with less pressure on him, and he gets to reset and potentially rebuild his career. We wish him all the best, of course, but he's not the only receiver potentially going to be having a new start to his career here this season. Brandon Aiyuk maybe someday is going to be traded from the San Francisco 49ers. The latest on that and our thoughts on how Aiyuk is still the next guy to be traded despite other guys being traded in the meantime, coming up next on today's episode of Locked On NFL, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. What are your self-care non-negotiables? Maybe you go to the gym every day and you never skip that leg day. Maybe you wake up every morning and meditate, or go to bed every night and meditate before then. Maybe you do yoga every day, or maybe it's therapy day, or it should be therapy day. Because bottom line is, when your schedule is hectic, maybe it's packed with kids' activities, work projects got you going, or your friends and family are pulling you each and every which way, your priorities can oftentimes suffer. Honestly, we kind of feel guilty from time to time, don't we? When we do things that only make us happy, you start to feel a little bit selfish. Well, if you talk to somebody who can see your life from a third party view, you might find out that it's actually very important to do those things that might even only be for you. And if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. So never skip therapy day as part of your self-care maintenance program with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. It seems like forever now that Brandon Aiyuk is going to get traded any moment. The next hour, the next day, Brandon Aiyuk is going to be on the move. Instead, it's Jahan Dotson on the move from the Washington Commanders to his hometown Philadelphia Eagles. Thank you for making Locked On NFL your first listen of the day today and every day. For your second listen, check out the Locked On Fantasy Football podcast. Get your daily insight to the best fantasy football draft strategies so you can win your league this season. All part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And Lauren, so I swear, man, like literally 2 weeks ago, everybody on Twitter was like, within the hour, Brandon Aiyuk will be a Pittsburgh Steeler. That the 49ers have received an ultimatum. They either sign a deal or they trade him to Pittsburgh, and the deal is done. And it has drug on. Honestly, it's kind of getting to, you remember the Aaron Rodgers? I don't know where he went, man, but you remember like he went somewhere like a darkness retreat or whatever it was, and everybody's like, wondering, like, are you retiring? Or are you not retiring? And how annoying that got. I'm honestly to the point where I'm annoyed with this Brandon Aiyuk story. And the latest coming out of NFL Network from Tom Pelissero is, quote, the closer we get to the start of the regular season and knowing that Brandon Aiyuk has not been practicing this entire time, there does come a point in which the value of the trade on which they have agreed to, at least a framework, as Ian Rappaport repeated a week or so ago, that would potentially change. In other words, if the player is not ready to play or not have a full-time role in an early portion of the season, that impacts the compensation, end quote. So now we're entering a portion of this conversation, Lauren, according to Tom Pelissero, again, where the Pittsburgh Steelers may actually be like, hey, guys, we don't have time to get him in football shape. Because what does everybody say? You got to play football to get into football shape. Brandon Aiyuk is not playing football. We don't have time to get him spun up. It's going to be 2 or 3 weeks before we can really use him to the maximum ability we want to. Yada, yada, yada. Learn the playbook, learn the quarterbacks, learn the checks, the reads, all that stuff. We're no longer going to give you the draft capital that we were willing to. And now the trade value goes down. So that's part of this conversation. Where are you in the ridiculous meter of this whole situation, and where do you place the blame? Because I'm at about a 7.8, and I'm putting the blame on the 49ers. Like, either pay the man or trade the man, bro. Like, what are you sitting on this pot for without doing you know what?
Yeah, I feel the most bad for Chris Carter of Locked On Steelers, who pretty much every day he'll tweet the video from SpongeBob of Mr. Krabs saying, and the next day, and the next day, and the next day, and the next day. Every single day there's some minute Brandon Aiyuk update, and nothing happens every single day. You know, I stay pretty insulated from it over in Bears world, where we don't have to worry about trading for wide receivers, but I know the Commanders have been sort of tangentially speculated into that conversation that we'll get to in a minute here. But
Yeah.
I find myself feeling like the 49ers are proving to be annoying in this, but also maybe getting the leverage back where, like, as you say, like, if the 49ers stand firm and say, okay, we're not going to give Ayuk the money that he's looking for, and they wait long enough on these trades to say, oh, we don't really want the offer, or we're not super jazzed with the offer, or for whatever reason the trade doesn't materialize. If all the trade partners fall apart, then Ayuk's got nothing left other than to sit out the remainder of the season. Like, to me, like, even trying to hold out to the trade deadline, like, the Steelers are not, I don't know, they're not this like Super Bowl team that's one Brandon Aiyuk away from being a major contender, or even the Commanders if they really seriously enter this mix. Like, it would be one thing for a team that like is really like the Ravens, for example, who I don't think they can afford Ayuk, but like, you just add a wide receiver like Ayuk to that offense, that could be what puts them over the top. And like, okay, that team could trade for Ayuk, be patient for a couple weeks because this is more about the postseason and the end of the season, and you don't need him to be great for weeks 1, 2, and 3. But like, the Steelers aren't quite there. I mean, I'm sure they see themselves as a contender, but not there where, yeah, they're probably going to drop out and say, all right, not worth it at some point. So then all that's left is Ayuk and the 49ers. And will Ayuk sit out the entirety of the season and keep racking up fines? I mean, I think the 49ers are sitting there willing to say, yeah, we'll wait. Whenever you're ready to come talk more seriously at the table, that's when we'll talk. But I think they're going to play the hard and long game here to keep things firm on their end. And I don't fully blame them, but I also don't blame Ayuk for wanting to get as much money as he can.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that every side of this conversation has kind of their motivations, and they're all based in reality, and they're all based in logical decision making for their own cause, right? And this is the business side of it. Like teams will draft a guy and say, like, man, we really care about you, we really want what's best for you, and da 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 until contract time comes, and then we want what's best for us, right? And that's pretty much how this is going to work. Now, what's interesting here, because you talk about Washington, and again, Washington was kind of in the fold early on, and then reports came out probably about a month ago now that said that Washington pulled out. There were some conversations between Adam Peters, the Commanders general manager, and John Lynch, the 49ers general manager, before the NFL draft. So we know that there was interest there, at least from the Commanders side, to kick the tires on Brandon Aiyuk. Of course, Adam Peters came from San Francisco, so he knows that organization. He knows Brandon Aiyuk as well. So there's a lot of ties there. And then Jaden Daniels, Brandon Aiyuk, Arizona State teammates, best friends to this day. So there's a lot of reasons here for the Washington Commanders to be interested. The question is, why haven't they done that? And the best answer that we can give from being on ground with the Commanders is Adam Peters is trying to do this reclamation project in Washington in a very, very intelligent way, where he's not going to go crazy, dumping a bunch of draft capital, dumping a bunch of cap space into one player here and there and making these big splash moves. We understand that. However, this is where things get intriguing, and this is where Commanders fans could start to agree with you, Lauren, that the Commanders actually won this trade, which, for the record, I actually agree with you as well already. But Commanders fans could get on board with both of us if the Washington Commanders turn that Philadelphia Eagles third-round pick into Brandon Aiyuk. And the way they could do this is the Pittsburgh Steelers, the reports were they were willing to give the 49ers a second-round pick for Brandon Aiyuk. If that price is now lowering because of the circumstances, the Pittsburgh Steelers are not in as much of a rebuild project. They're still trying to win now. They're trying to win the AFC North right now. So that's their concern. The Washington Commanders are very much a project, right? So if you're Adam Peters, if that price goes down to a third-round pick, what you might be able to do is combine your third-round pick with the third-round pick you just got for Jahan Dotson. Essentially, you trade Jahan Dotson and a fifth-round pick and a third-round pick. So Jahan Dotson, third-round pick, fifth-round pick for Brandon Aiyuk, and 2 seventh-round picks. Lauren Cox, if I told you that's what the Washington Commanders spent to get Brandon Aiyuk, what would you grade that trade?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like great value. I mean, you have to obviously ensure that you're turning around and agreeing to a contract with Brandon Aiyuk and not getting into a Hassan Riddick situation, but like that would be immense value for a 1,000-yard receiver, a bona fide stud like Brandon Aiyuk. I know one of the other concerns or things that I've heard coming out of Washington is like, all right, they're paying Terry McLaurin $24 million this year, $25 million next year, and Brandon Aiyuk wants to get paid certainly that much, if not more. So can you invest $50+ million into 2 wide receivers? And it's certainly a lot, but you've only got 2 more years of McLaurin at this money right now, and then you'll figure it out from there. And you've got your rookie quarterback on a relatively cheap rookie quarterback contract. And I can't help but point to the Chicago Bears, who paid DJ Moore $20+ million a year, and then went and traded for Keenan Allen, who's also making $20+ million a year. A little bit different because Allen is 32 and in the last year of his current contract, and not going to be a 5-year type of guy that someone like Brandon Aiyuk could come in and be. But still, like, when you've got a rookie quarterback, why not spend a little bit much and maybe overdo it a little bit on the wide receivers, because it sure as heck isn't going to hurt him to have too many good weapons to throw to, as opposed to right now, it's Terry McLaurin and some question marks as what he's going to be thrown to at wide receiver.
So I think, look, even though Adam Peters is trying to do this a certain kind of way, I don't think it's outside the realm of possibility that maybe he comes back into this conversation, especially if the Steelers play hardball, because I wouldn't be surprised if John Lynch says, hey, Adam, Steelers just lower their offer to a third rounder. What do you got? And says, you know what? Let's go ahead and we'll take that third rounder from Washington instead of Pittsburgh to prove a point to other GMs around the NFL. But guys are wanting to get paid. Some guys are getting paid. Atlanta Falcons continuing to throw money at their defense. The latest Falcons defender, AJ Terrell, making big bank. We'll talk about our thoughts on that contract coming up next on today's episode of Locked On NFL, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. And when you're hiring for your small business, you're going to want to find quality professionals that are right for your role. And that's why you need to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. But LinkedIn isn't just any other job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job, but might be open to your role if it's the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong places. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. So hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn, because LinkedIn even knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats, they don't always have the right amount of time or resources to hire properly. So they're constantly finding ways to make that process easier. 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. So post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Wrapping up today's episode of Locked On NFL. We've got players getting traded, players wanting traded and paid, and we've got players wanting paid who got paid. AJ Terrell, Atlanta Falcons cornerback. The Atlanta Falcons continue to be movers and shakers, is how the NFL.com put it. And I think that's a pretty accurate term, because, Lauren, this is 2 weeks in a row. We're wrapping up the week talking about the Atlanta Falcons making moves on their defense. This time it is cornerback AJ Terrell getting a 4-year, $81 million contract extension, the second highest paid cornerback in NFL history. The question is it too much money for AJ Terrell?
Yeah, it's one of those things where, again, I always want to preface that I believe players should try and get as much money as they possibly can, and would never hold that against AJ Terrell for trying to get as much money as he can. But in the context of the rest of the cornerback market, this feels like a little bit of an overpay to me. That AJ Terrell is a very good cornerback and a guy who Atlanta should want to lock up and keep around for a while. But when you look at some of the other guys that just got contracts, I think the two that stand up to me were L'Jarius Sneed from, well, now the Titans, but previously the Chiefs, for $76 million over 4 years, and then Jalen Johnson from the Bears got $76 million over 4 years. Like, AJ Terrell gets an extra $5 million more than both of those guys, and I think both of those guys are pretty well head and shoulders better cornerbacks than Terrell. Like, I was going through even like Terrell's this past season, like, not in the top 25 in completion percentage allowed, yards after catch allowed, yards per target, catches allowed per target. Like, most of the stats across the board, you're not seeing AJ Terrell even in the top 25 at the cornerback spot. I mean, he's in the top 25 in missed tackles, as far as like most missed tackles and penalties as well. Like, so to me, it's like, not to say that he's some bad player who doesn't deserve anything, but like, I would much rather have Sneed or Jalen Johnson at their respective prices than AJ Terrell, who is very good, but like not a Pro Bowl player up to this stage in his career. And just, yeah, he's fine, but like, don't make him second highest paid behind Jair Alexander in the entire NFL. I don't think he quite has earned that yet.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because we talk about the NFL being a fraternity, and we see this, I don't say every year, but we see this actually quite often with the running backs during free agency. When running backs aren't getting paid and they're not getting signed, you see like all the running backs, like Derrick Henry comes out and says, this guy deserves to be paid. And, that guy comes out and says, this guy deserves to be paid. And like, that's where you kind of see this NFL as a fraternity thing kind of going on. Well, what we all forget sometimes is like GMs are kind of a fraternity as well. Head coaches are or coaches just in general, fraternity. Owners are a fraternity, or whatever you want to call it. Obviously there's a mixed group in there. So this is the kind of move where like some other GMs or some other owners might be looking sideways at these Falcons guys and be like, bro, come, like, are you serious right now? You know what I mean? Because like you look down the road, and I mean, you just mentioned some other players, but like you look at a guy, I kind of want to say Marshawn Lattimore. Like we'll see if he can get healthy and stay healthy, right? But when Marshawn Lattimore is healthy for an extended period of time, could you say he's better than AJ Terrell? And then you could probably make that case again. Healthy Marshawn Lattimore, calm down. And some of these guys that are also going to be looking for contracts, like they're just licking their chops saying like, well, that guy's getting that money. That's what I'm, this is what I should be looking for. I actually was just having this conversation with another reporter about Brandon Aiyuk, because the question with Brandon Aiyuk is how much money does he really want? Because there's reports of what he's asking for, but then there's what does he really expect to actually get? Sometimes it's the same thing, but sometimes it's not. And if you look at AJ Terrell as a top 10 cornerback in the NFL, should you be paying him top 2 money? I would say not. If you look at him as top 5 cornerback in the NFL, because we know there's an inflation here, right? But for me, unless you're a top 3 corner, you're not getting top 2 money. Like you better be a top 3 corner, because if you're top 3, then I'll give you that top 2 as inflation. If you're a top 2, then maybe you can talk about top 1. But if you're top 5, I'm talking about giving you like top 3 money. You know what I'm saying? As a GM. And sometimes you're talking about splitting hairs, but at the same time, the more hairs we decide not to split and just jump over and go ahead and pay a guy, now the more the guy behind you has to come in. You got to remember, if you're lucky enough to be in that job long enough, AJ Terrell's contract comes up to 2028. Your buddies over here who are not going to have to pay their guys more because you paid your guy more, you may now have to leapfrog them come 2028 when AJ Terrell is still under 30 years old looking for a new contract. So, again, it all kind of comes back full circle. And I'm with you. I'm never going to look at a player and say, bro, you shouldn't have taken that much money, because you should absolutely take all the money they are willing to give you. But I'm looking at the Atlanta Falcons saying, hey, guys, maybe chill a little bit with some of the spending you're doing there on your defense.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about splitting hairs, and like it seems like that's what the cornerback market was doing for a while. Like it started this offseason with Tyson Campbell from the Jaguars, got 4 years, 76.5 million. L'Jarius Sneed got 4 years, 76.4 million. Like literally over the course of 4 years, $100,000 difference. And then Jalen Johnson came in at exactly 76 million. So like 3 of the top cornerbacks in the market were all within a total of $500,000 over 4 years. And then AJ Terrell got 5 more million than all of them all of a sudden, for clearly not, to me, being a clearly better cornerback than Nathan. So just like if he had come in at 76.6 or even just 77, if he was just, the next notch up, it would be a little bit more tolerable to say, okay, you were last to the table, so he wants to be a little bit more than the last guys. I get that. But like he got more than a full $1 million every year more than these 3 other guys, who at least 2 of them I think are pretty clearly better at this point. And if I'm the agent of Patrick Surtain in Denver, or Sauce Gardner in New York, and I think Derek Stingley is coming up, I think they're in the same draft class, right? And next year, those guys will start to be eligible for their new contracts. They're saying, sweet, Terrell gave us a $5 million head start in those negotiations from where we thought we were going to be based on Jalen Johnson and L'Jarius Sneed's contracts.
Yeah. Meanwhile, safeties are other than Antoine Winfield Jr., who's still the highest paid DB in the game, like safeties are sitting back saying, guys, what do we got to do here? Only two safeties are in the top 10 of all DBs in the NFL in average annual value of their current contract. So they're wondering what's going on with the back end of the secondary, why they can't get a little bit of that love. But again, a lot of happy cornerbacks out there seeing this new deal for AJ Terrell, not just AJ Terrell, because there are some guys that we just talked about who are licking their chops to get their crack at resetting the market as well. And if any of those deals go down over the weekend, Kevin Oestreicher of Locked On Ravens will surely be here on Monday to help you go through all of that. So make sure you're coming back for that. For your second listen today, check out the Locked On Fantasy Football podcast to get your daily insight into the strategies that are going to make you a fantasy football champion this year. As always, thank you for making Locked On NFL your first listen of the day, every day. Thanks for coming through on a regular basis like you do. For Lauren Cox, I'm David Harrison. We'll see you right back here next Friday for another episode of Locked On NFL, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.